Hello, Austria. Welcome to My Millennial Money. We've got a banger of an episode today, so we're going to get right into it. I'm going to first welcome John and Vince Scully. Hi,
Hello,
John.
Glenn. How's things?
I'm good.
Welcome,
Hi, Vince.
Vince.
Thanks for coming back, Vince.
Yeah, bit of a trip up to the coast.
Vince drove up to the sunny coast, everyone, and it's great to have Vince as a returning guest to the podcast. Now, This is how we're going to pluck this chicken today. I first and foremost want to say that, we're going to cover a lot of ground, and there is no way on the planet that we can actually scratch everyone's individual itch. So we just want you to get encouraged and just get the brain juices flowing about how you can apply what we've talked about to your situation, and ultimately go and get some advice if you need it. So that's basically what I want to say. But there's going to be basically 6 sections that we're going to talk about. The first one, we'll all have our initial thoughts on the topic each, like pay off mortgage versus invest. Then I want John to chat about using equity in your property to invest for another property. Then I'm going to throw over to Vince and ask him just to explain what debt recycling is and how it works. And fourthly, we're going to talk about mortgage structures. Fifthly, if that's a word, we're going to talk about future considerations. So what if you're rent vesting or if this is your forever home? Then we'll round it out with some advantages of either paying down the mortgage or investing. And then we'll just read some comments from the Facebook group. So we can't do this podcast without Sunsuper. And Sunsuper takes responsible investing very seriously. They have a practical approach to ESG investing and have a specific socially conscious balanced investment options. And the returns are pretty decent as well. I've got some of my super in that option myself. Now, John, do you remember what ESG stands for?
Yes.
Awesome. Can you remind John?
It stands for environmental, social, and governance.
Yes.
Not really sure I understand what all that means, but it's code for ethical.
Yes.
Ethical investing.
And if you want to learn more about Sunsuper's ethical investment option, you can look at the episode we did with Stuart Wilson, who's the head of their ethical investment team. And that's episode 324 on the podcast.
Good memory.
Great memory.
And for those of you from the UK, ethics is not the county next to Tuttex.
So we'll start this topic of pay off the mortgage versus invest. Vince, 2-minute opening statements to the judge and jury, and then we'll go to John for his opening remarks.
The question is, should I
Pay off my mortgage or invest?
Yes, it depends, maybe.
You're so helpful.
Yeah.
No, to be serious, there is no one answer to that. The way I look at it is that in general, investing will get you a better return over time than paying off your home loan. Because your home loan today is 2.83%, whereas historically the Australian Stock Exchange has returned 10%. Now, obviously that 3% is after tax and the 10% is before tax, but still over time, mathematically, you will generally be better off investing. Now, the thing that would suggest that you might not invest is if you've got a new home loan, it's a high percentage of the value of your property, or your payments are a big chunk of your income. So generally, I would suggest that most people should focus on their home loan whilst their loan to value ratio is above 70 and the payments are more than 30% of their income. Once you get below both of those thresholds, now it's time to at least put some towards investing.
Yeah. Thanks for those opening remarks. John?
Thank you, Vince. So I just want to start by saying good debt versus bad debt. So for the purpose, I refer bad debt as your own mortgage, and it's not because it's not income producing, we can't get any tax benefits from it, versus good debt where we can borrow money for income producing assets. So I think the answer, if you gave me give me a one-word answer, I would say both. So I would say,
That's sort of the same thing.
yeah, pay down your mortgage because that's your bad debt. You need to focus on that. But at the same time, have the ability to draw out equity to go and invest and diversify your assets over time. And I always look at it personally as I want to be doing 4 things at the same time. Pay down bad debt, increase cash flow in my life, minimize my taxes, increase assets. So I'm putting a focus on all those 4 at any one time. I agree with that part, Vince, that says if I've got a high mortgage that's maybe over 30% of my total, then I need to get that down in the short term, but still keep our eye on that diversification.
Yeah. I think that diversification is the key to that.
Yeah. And
It's the only free lunch when it comes to finance.
Yeah.
Totally. I guess my opening remarks are, I think for the purpose of this episode, because investing, it could be 2-prong or 3-prong. So it's not only paying down the mortgage versus investing. When we talk about investing, it then leads to what tax structure and what type of investment. So for the purpose of this episode, I just want everyone to maybe think about doing something other with your money or doing something else with your money. And we're going to do another episode with Vince about particularly should we invest inside super or outside super, and maybe chat about some other investment options as well. So that's all I would say. And I guess my following kind of remarks, and it's a question for us here today about rules of thumb. And Vince mentioned some rules of thumb. And if I had a brush stroke, what do they call it? Broad brush stroke, maybe around age 40 is an age where it might be more opportune to start looking at the future because you're more settled into your life. And by looking at the future, it might mean investing into super because you may have got the LVR down a little bit. You may have got your life established and you may need access to that money, albeit on an offset account or a redraw or something like that.
Yes, I mean, this is a trade-off between mathematical efficiency and flexibility and diversification. That, mathematically the answer is you should invest, and other people's money is the best money to invest with.
Yeah.
Is your name Robert Kiyosaki? OPM?
But it does create inflexibility in your life because obviously the more debt you got, the more necessary your day job becomes, and you lose the flexibility that will be useful, particularly as you're younger. And I guess the implications of those sort of, so if some is good, more isn't always better.
I think it also comes down to the cash flow or the yield of your investment, so doesn't it? Like
it does.
I see a lot of people tie themselves in knots because they've gone for that capital growth, paid no respect to cash flow, and as a result, their lifestyle suffers, or they have to sell properties or whatever it is, and back to square one again.
Exactly.
Now, John, if we can use this as a bit of a transition, because I think an overarching thing that we've all kind of talked about, and I'll call it out as the elephant in the room, and that's mindset and risk profile. Now, someone may have grown up in a working class family, and mum and dad, all they did was just pump the mortgage, and we never had any investment property because that was for wealthy people or whatever that mindset is. So, John, if we talk now about using either equity in our property or not paying down the mortgage to invest in property, because Emma Russell wrote, and she's a new member of the Facebook group, so welcome. She wrote, "Are you better off paying down a mortgage ASAP or spending the equivalent amount on 2 mortgages, i.e. a second property, if the repayments are within your means?" So talk to us if there was a new listener about they've got their mortgage, and I think it's safe to assume that you probably need to get your goals in order before you worry about should I get a house or a mortgage or invest. Like we're kind of talking if you do already have a mortgage. So just talk conceptually, new listener, they've grown up in a place where there's been no investment properties or no investing.
Yeah.
So talk about the investment property and the first things that someone should consider.
Yeah, and risk profile is a big part of that, isn't it? Like if you haven't known anyone that's invested and they've just purely grown up in the environment of pay down your own home and that's all, live happily ever after, contribute to super, then it's very hard to get out of that web, I suppose, and go it alone. So I think getting educated in that space to understand how that conceptually works. But going back to my initial statement of bad debt versus good debt, I think in Emma's example, you can actually do both. If she is paying down her own mortgage, and then have the ability to draw some equity out to go and invest, there's two things that stop people. It's mindset and finances. So if she's got the ability to have equity and the banks to lend her money, she needs to analyze the cash flow of what that investment property might look like. And if that's taken care of itself, which in a lot of cases in today's investing it is because interest rates are so low, then the risk is actually quite low. But it's perceived risk that stops a lot of people from doing that.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people can't get their mind around it, and it's totally okay because I was there once. You who are listening were probably there once. You guys were probably there once. How can I afford this? And I've heard people that get a big tax return at the end of the year because of the tax efficiencies. I always lean back to, if you get the right advice, you might be able to tweak your tax withholding from your employer. So instead of getting 10 grand back at the end of the year, you get a $200 back each week to help with that cash flow.
And I think I gave the example a few weeks ago where we've got a client at the moment who's paying down their own mortgage. Their own mortgage is quite comfortable, but they're also paying principal and interest on their investment property in a time where there's dual income coming from that property. But interest rates being so low means that they're doing both of them quite comfortably. So everyone's situation is different, but I don't think there's been a better time in my investing to take advantage of diversifying assets and paying down mortgages because your interest rates are so low.
Yeah, it's a good point. Now, and we will move fast through these just to kind of set the scene, and then we can get a bit more into some free talk. Jack O'Brien in the group says thoughts on debt recycling. So we actually haven't really touched this topic before on the podcast, but in the simplest of terms, Vince, how would you explain debt recycling to somebody with a mortgage?
Yeah, I've always thought it was a bit of a strange expression, but it's used to refer to, let's say you've saved $10,000 and you want to invest and you've got a home loan. You have two choices. You can take your $10,000 and whack it straight in your CommSec account and buy some shares. Or you could take the $10,000 and pay down your home loan and then redraw it to invest in the shares. So now what you've done is you've taken your cash, you've reduced your non-deductible debt because you don't get a tax deduction for interest on your home loan. And then you've reborrowed the money. And so you're now going to get a tax deduction on the interest on that $10,000. So after tax, your net income is higher. Now, there's a few tricks and traps to doing that. Obviously, you need to make sure that it's very clearly identified that this cash was, drawn from your home loan and paid directly to CommSec and not parked in your offset account where it just gets muddied with everything else.
Yeah, and that speaks to getting the right advice. And if we turn it up a notch from 10 grand to 50 grand
sure. Or 100 grand.
Or 100 grand, you would obviously want to speak to your mortgage broker to set up a separate mortgage.
Yeah, or a separate split.
Or a separate split, sorry, yeah.
But that's an interesting point. You made the point earlier about stuff being cash flow positive given that interest rates are so low. But I think you've got to look at that separate from this funding decision. So if I've got $100,000 as a deposit on an investment property and I take that $100,000 and pay off my home loan, and now I'm borrowing the whole $500,000 for the new property, I might look at that $500,000 against the income of the property. And the property on its own, because it's 100% debt funded, looks like it's not cash flow positive. So I think you do have to divorce the investment decision from the funding decision.
Totally.
And at the end of the day, all property is cash flow positive as long as it's got a tenant. The thing that absorbs the rest of the money is the funding cost. So if your net debt doesn't change, you've got to be careful about taking that analysis and say, just because I took my $100,000 and parked it in my home loan and then borrowed the whole $500,000 to buy my investment property may create a negatively geared position, but it doesn't change the fundamentals of the investment.
No, and it's an important point. You've definitely got to understand what your strategy is to begin with. Tax is never the sole focus or the number one focus in my mind.
That's right. You never let the tax tail wag the investment dog.
Yeah, that's right.
Woof, woof. Now, I want to dig deeper on this debt recycling thing because there is a lot of chatting. So we'll assume that we've had extra cash or equity in our home. We've set up a separate split of $100,000. Now, we take that borrowed money, money, because we've converted it into a borrowed money, invest that into equities. Now, traditionally, advisors who recommend this stuff might use companies that have a high dividend payment, traditionally. And the reason why, the dividends from the shares get paid back onto the home mortgage. Is that right? Yeah. Mm-hmm. I'm just getting the Godfather to double check my. And then basically what happens, some of the dividends would be franked dividends. So some of the taxes have already been paid on that money. So you don't get double taxed. So there might be a higher tax return, but also you're claiming a tax deduction on the borrowed money for the investing. And then along the same lines, you're hoping that the underlying companies are increasing in value as well.
Yeah, and I think that's the main strategy for a lot of people is they want their investments to go up in value, don't they?
Yeah, and I think we need to be careful about, and this comes back to your point about positively geared property, that structuring or trying to structure the investment based on the cash flow is important for sustainability because obviously cash helps you stay in the market, but it's a dangerous road to follow when you use it to choose the investment. So take your share example, choosing to buy high dividend payers is not necessarily a winning strategy. No. Sure, it helps with the cash flow, and cash flow is important in staying in, but it may not be the best underlying investment. And certainly if you compare the high-yielding Australian shares, say Vanguard's VHY, for example, or AFIC, which are both dividend plays largely, to the ASX 200 as a whole, they've generally underperformed.
But that's only because you haven't added back any dividends as an accumulation index comparison. Would that be correct?
No, on an accumulation basis, that will be true. But the accumulation basis doesn't account for the franking credits because all these indexes are
a pre-tax,
are calculated on a pre-tax basis.
I love it because we're going a bit deeper here now, which is awesome. In my world, that's the equivalent of going to a really small regional town with a high cash flow.
Exactly.
And maybe not getting the capital growth out of it, but coming back with the original strategy, what was the intention? For that particular asset, it might have been high yielding, high cash flow as the goal because I've got a few other assets over here that are maybe a capital growth strategy instead of cash flow.
Sure, that's back to diversification. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. And particularly with, once you get above a sort of a normal yield, so somewhere between 3 and 6 maybe, once you get above that, you really got to be asking some serious questions.
Yeah.
Certainly we were getting those sort of yields in mining towns.
That's right.
In some regional centres, but it's generally unsustainable or it's high because there's no capital growth.
Yeah. And I think at time in life is really important.
Sorry, I'm not trying to teach a real estate guy real estate.
No, it's awesome. I love thrashing this stuff out because we're in a situation where we bought in Western Sydney in 2012. It was already a 5% gross yield. Property was looking after itself, and we identified that was a pretty good time to buy in that region. Right now, I wouldn't live there myself, but I thought it was a pretty good investment. So fast forward 4 or 5 years, the property's cost nothing to hold, and it's gone up in value. Like that's the ultimate in property, I think. However, if you haven't got your eye on both of those two as a strategy, then you can be left out in the water without a paddle.
Yeah, and I think you've also got to look at within the suburb where you are relative to the median in that suburb.
Yes.
So if you go, you might decide that Milson's Point was a good buy, but if you're going to buy something that's very expensive there, you'll get a lower yield, and the suburbs generally move together.
Yeah.
Still on the debt recycling thing into equities, I'm just kind of writing some notes here. When, and probably more for Vince, because I'll be the first to say I never use this strategy in my financial planning practice, just because it takes a particular type of risk profile to be able to do that. And I personally do not do it in the traditional sense because of a few reasons of why you wouldn't, which we'll get to. But when do you think it would be suitable to consider such a strategy, and when do you think it wouldn't be suitable?
Okay.
And then I'll ask you.
Can I just take you up on that risk attitude point? I think there's three aspects to risk. There's your predisposition to accept risk, and some people are inherently more tolerant of risk and uncertainty. There's your ability to withstand the risk. So if the risk does turn up and you do or lose a ton of money, what's your capacity to recover? And then the one that gets forgotten in all of this is your level of understanding of the risk.
And I wrote that actually just as you're talking. There should be an educational foundation to this.
Yeah.
And
What's the worst that can happen?
So many people, I was going to say walk into my office, but my virtual office, say, I'm risk averse, I want to invest in property. And yet so you're quite happy to borrow 80% or 90% of the purchase price and buy something that's worth more than your net worth and has a risk that's greater than a diversified pool of ASX 200 shares. But it's perceived as being low risk because it's real. You can touch it, you can drive by, you can paint the walls. Property never falls in value. Well, sometimes it does.
Ask that to the people who bought 3 properties up in the Hunter Valley in their super fund.
Yeah. Or in 1890, it took till 1962 for Australian real estate prices to recover in real quality adjusted terms. Now, we haven't seen that in 40 years, and I'm not in the business of predicting.
I thought you were. That's why you're here.
But I am in the
All right, let's wrap this up.
Yeah,
but I am in the
Game
business
over.
of planning, preparing, and protecting.
Totally.
And both real estate and shares have a place in almost everybody's wealth creation strategy.
Absolutely.
The question is how much of each and when, and making sure that you actually do understand the risk that you're taking.
Yeah. No, I agree. And
But getting back to your point, it would be a good strategy for people who have some equity in their properties. Yep. So they've had their home for a while, and they've built up a bit of equity either by the property value rising or by their repaying the debt. They've got good stable incomes, and they don't go too far into it. And there are ways of doing it. So you can either draw down on your home loan and borrow it. You can invest in, there are some funds now that will allow you to have a geared investment, i.e. the fund includes some borrowing inside, and that can be an inexpensive way of doing it.
And then you're getting into, here's a wild one. Set up your mortgage or set up a split. So you got borrowed money and then borrow and invest in a fund that has internal gearing and double gear. I mean, it's a wild ride.
I've got 2 words for that. Storm Financial.
Yeah.
Google it.
And that's why I said it's wild, and I kind of made this on the video rocking like I'm on a cowboy.
But that does come
type
back to our point about debt recycling.
Yeah.
So if you have $10,000 to invest, it's not an unreasonable tactic to take that 10 and borrow another 10. So the fact that you've taken the 10 and paid it off your home loan, and now you're borrowing 20, doesn't change the risk profile. You've got to mentally separate these 2 debts.
Yeah.
but it doesn't make it riskier just because you've recycled the debt.
But you've lowered your bad debt in the process, haven't you?
Yeah, I must admit, I'm not a fan of this bad debt, good debt.
Neither am I. And I always pull John up and say all debt's bad.
I
look at there's three categories.
If
of
I had
debt
a choice
in
of
my
not having debt, I know what I would take.
book. There are three categories of debt in my book. There's red debt, which is the bad stuff, and that usually comes from spending more than you earn, which is usually credit cards and personal loans, which typically also have high interest rates. And then there's what I call amber debt, which is sort of neither good nor bad, and is largely around spreading the cost of an asset over the period you're going to use it, like your home and your car.
And HEX will help?
I put HEX in the next category, the green category.
Oh, wow.
Which is the deductible debt, or good debt in your sense. And I guess green, good.
Yeah.
HEX, that it's generally around improving either your financial capital or your human capital.
Yeah.
And the red ones are obviously your number one priority.
Yeah. We're not running red lights.
And they're the hardest ones because you've got them because you've been spending more than you earn. So you actually have to have a double whammy to get over. You've got to reduce your spending so you're not making them bigger. And then you've got to start attacking.
So it's almost like greedy consumption, overconsumption debt, lifestyle debt, your home, and then growth debt.
Yeah, I think more about spreading the cost. That it would be ridiculous to suggest that you can pay for something you're going to consume over 30 years in one month. That's just a ridiculous nonsense. So the choice to buy a home is really a choice to fix your housing cost. It may or may not be a good investment, but that's not the point of the purchase. The purchase is to fix your short position, that we become adults short real estate because we have to have somewhere to live. And so by buying, we're fixing that cost with the added plus that when you're finished using it, it's still got some value. And that value may be more or less than you paid for it.
Hopefully more.
That's a good point.
Historically, it's been worth more.
Yeah. So what I take about from that, for example, when you wouldn't maybe do the debt recycling traditional strategy, if you don't have any intentions to be in that house for maybe 10 years or a bit longer term, would that be correct? Because you start moving around mortgages, it can just start to get a bit hectic. And if you need to upgrade the house and they go, well, you need to sell down some shares to make this happen, like it's just more moving parts.
And that sort of comes back to my point about not doing it until you've got your home loan under control. So if you're close to that 80% mark and property prices happen to fall, or your income falls, refinancing your home loan is going to become potentially problematic, and that might trigger a sale if you need to move for work, for example.
Yeah, so just for the listeners, 80% you're meaning loan to value ratio?
Yes, sorry.
Yeah. So absolutely, totally agree with you. You don't want to be going too deep into that mortgage territory.
My last question on the debt recycling thing, and we have camped here for a bit because I find it interesting to discuss anyway, and I'm sure you do too. If you did do that $100,000 second mortgage split or whatever you want to call it, would you be more inclined to just pump that into a managed fund or a individual stock portfolio? I know what I would probably
I think diversification is the key.
Yeah, absolutely.
You pump it into your studio.
You buy some more lights.
Yeah, basically.
So diversification is the key. Now, whether you achieve that diversification by buying 20, 30, 40, 50 different shares, or you buy a managed investment fund, or you buy an index fund or an LIC is less important. But diversification is the key. And we know that the volatility of an ASX 200 portfolio geared 50-50 is less than a single residential property in Australia.
How much focus do you put on someone being educated or taking an interest in that particular asset class?
Sometimes too much interest can actually be dangerous.
Yeah.
And because people who have a little bit of knowledge start wanting to become hands-on I'm sure you see this in real estate where people go, oh, maybe I should be painting it. Maybe I should be building a granny flat out the back.
Emotional kicks in.
And you start getting these emotional reactions. Emotions are the enemy when it comes to success with investment.
And love what? Let's talk about tax.
Let's talk about tax.
Let's talk about tax, baby. A little strategy, and I know a lot of self-employed builders do this. I'm not going to comment on why they do it, but they may renovate their principal place of residence. Then they might move on, sell it, and do it again. So talk to us about renovating your home as a quote-unquote investment with the view that this is an asset that I can spend 50 grand on it, get it revalued, and it's now worth an extra 110 grand because I know that if I sell this asset being my home, there's no capital gains tax. So I'm just going to throw that out onto the floor if anyone wants any comments on that.
I think it's dangerous mixing consumption with investment. That this notion that your home is an investment is sort of a nonsense because you can never realize the gain because the gain is really just future rent. So if you buy a property for $500,000 and if 10 years time it's worth $1 million, that just reflects the fact that the rent's doubled. So whilst it's a store of value that you can access to do other things with, you still need somewhere to live. So unless you're going to move to a regional centre and buy a cheaper house, you never actually can take that money out. So the notion of treating, you've got to stop thinking of your home as an investment.
But I think what Glenn's example is more the case of, and I use the builder, they buy something, add value to it on the cheap.
Yep.
It increases in value. They sell it. They avoid capital gains tax because it's their principal place of residence. They repeat that 2 or 3 times to the point where they're buying their forever home with no debt.
Yep.
That fair?
Yeah,
it is. The problem with that strategy is the getting your money where you get your honey. And
keep talking, baby. I like when you talk dirty to me.
And what I mean by that is a builder's livelihood is fundamentally dependent on the real estate market. And so by investing in the same place where you get your income, you're doubling down. And I see this a lot with people who work in finance, particularly stockbrokers. They end up with these portfolios full of speculative floats that
because they're involved in
because
it too much.
they start to believe their own Kool-Aid.
Yeah.
And you see it with real estate agents too. Most real estate agents have property portfolios,
but local to where they operate.
Exactly.
Yeah,
so you
right.
just double down, and and it works until it doesn't work.
Yeah, and I think your point's a good one in respect to it. Really comes back to emotion, doesn't it?
It does.
They're getting emotionally involved in that strategy. I've spoken to a lot of clients who are builders who have done this and done it well, but I've also spoken to others who don't do it well because it affects their lifestyle because they're having to do things on weekends and it's graying the area of their 9 to 5
years.
Yeah. And we're sort of putting out builders here for the moment, but I think the other implication is, or the other thing that needs to be factored in is what's our cost to purchase and what's our cost to sell.
And I wrote in my notes, a lot of these things when people get their bit of paper out, they don't factor in stamp duty on the way in somewhere else.
Yeah, so you're factoring in your stamp duty on the way in, you're factoring in your agent's fees on the way out. So when you look at the net position, is it actually a worthwhile transaction when you actually take into account the hours that builder's
especially if you're a builder
put in.
And you could be spending those hours fixing up someone else's house at $50 an hour.
Correct.
Or whatever.
Yeah.
No, I think a lot of it's illusory. That you've got a lot of the gain comes from the market moving while you've held the property.
Totally.
And if you want to go down the straight shooter line, it's possibly questionably illegal if they are burying costs in their business for their principal place of residence.
Yeah, I wasn't even going there, but yeah.
No, but if I want to really pick it out, they're trying to, it's a gaming of the system, which, it's whatever. I'm not here to judge. I'm just making a comment.
Yeah. But it is very difficult to do a buy, cosmetic, renovate, sell and make money unless the market moves around you.
Yeah, in a flat market, it's very, very hard.
Mm. But it speaks to like other business owners where, and I've known of a handful where, my retirement is my business, and getting to the pointy end of the stick, they haven't invested outside the business, and then they find out we can't sell the business and it was worth $400,000 less than what we thought it was.
Yeah.
So,
or you've got a tourism business and COVID hits the year you want to retire.
Yeah. And gosh.
Talk about having all your eggs in the one basket.
Yeah. And it's not a judgy comment to people, because I really do feel like I don't know if we could actually stomach what it would be like to wake up one morning and say no income, like on an emotional level, like, because it hasn't happened to me. And I just thoughts for anyone. My thoughts are with anyone out there that are in that situation. There's an interesting question here, and we might touch on it more next episode, and I might leave it as a comment. And Hannah Bird asks, extra super contributions versus paying down the mortgage versus pumping the pumping the offset, especially considering we are likely to approach the maximum concessional cap later in our career if we haven't already. So less chance to pump pre-tax super later. Did I make that sound weird?
Yeah, I mean, there's a few things happening there. There's the basic question about whether
amongst you sounding weird.
Yeah.
Basic question about whether you should pay off your home loan or invest in super, which is sort of one step further than the pay off your home loan or invest.
Yeah. And we'll dig down deep next episode.
And then the next question is the timing of those, that there is an annual cap on how much you can put into super.
And thankfully now they've got the
carry forward rule.
Carry forward,
Yeah.
sorry. Yeah.
That is particularly useful for women who often take time out and being able to catch up on previous years. But we've only got 1 or 2 years that it applies to so far.
Yeah, because it will ratchet up to a 5 years look back.
Yeah.
So just for those who just glossed over there, basically you can put $25,000 a year as a deductible contribution to your super each year.
Including the bit that your employer puts in. Yep.
Which includes the 9.5%. So basically if you don't use all of that $25,000 in 4 years' time, you can look back at the last 3 or 4 years or up to 5 years and use the cap.
Yeah.
Now it'll be interesting to see, Vince, what will happen with federal budgets going forward post-COVID with stuff like this, but it's certainly up our sleeve. And the only comment I would make on that is that, concessional contribution caps have only ever come down. It started at $50,000. Then I think it went to 30.
Well, it used to be infinite.
Well, yeah, I'm not that old, Vince. But under the new super system, was it $50,000?
Yeah, it started at 50.
Yeah. And then...
That's why it's good to get Vince on.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. And then it went down to 30, I think, as a transition, and then 25. Now, the question is, in 10 years' time, is it going to be 20 or 18?
Yeah, well, although I think the bigger issue now, rather than the 25 affects individual years, but if you look at it over a career, the 1.6 million total super balance is actually going to get you overall. So if you put in 25 every year, you're going to easily go beyond that.
Yeah.
So even people on moderate incomes contributing every year for 40 years will get awfully close to that 1.6 cap.
So what Vince is saying there, everyone, is the government have changed the rules again.
Surprise, surprise.
Yeah. That if you've got $1.6 million in your super fund and you retire tomorrow, you can have that 1.6 million growing at 0% tax rate.
But there's another 1.6 million that's relevant here, and that is once you hit 1.6 million in total superannuation balance, you can no longer make contributions or deductible contributions.
Yes, but I think it's a bigger issue for future planning that, for my example, once you get over the 1.6, they will start charging you 15%
Except
tax on that.
except you can't get over 1 point. Well, you can only get over 1.6 from earnings now.
Yes.
So the 1.6 balance transfer cap, which you've just mentioned, is relevant to those whose balances is greater than 1.6.
You can only bring 1.6 into pension phase.
So, and 1.6 million in super is a very good retirement.
I was going to say, it's not a bad outcome.
But anyway,
and there's not that many people actually get there.
I don't want to go down that rabbit hole, but I want to talk about now, and we'll just have a look at the clock here. We might just go for another 10 or 15 minutes. Let's talk about mortgage structures. So how would you guys propose, and I've got some examples here, if someone did want to just go, you know what, I get what you guys are saying, but my goal is to, we're a dink, dual income, no kids. We're just going to pump this mortgage and be debt-free by the time we're 30. Then we're going to have kids. Then mum or dad can be a full-time parent or whatever that looks like, okay? So if we are going down that approach, what are we doing in terms of how we're structuring the mortgage, and then how are we going to structure the mortgage if we do want to maybe invest as opposed to pay down more?
So two separate questions.
I mean, is there different ways to structure the mortgage, or is there a catch-all healthy structure that gives us most flexibility?
Look, first of all, Vince, I would just say you need to be looking at principal and interest with an offset account. You'd ideally have multiple offsets so that if you have got some kids funds or some holiday funds or some
other goals,
other issues that you want to save for, that's also helping offset the interest you've got on your mortgage, but just making extra repayments and paying that down as quick as possible, and then assessing that every 12 months to see whether it's still competitive, because lending conditions are always changing. Banks always have a different appetite from time to time. So just continually keeping it front of mind and not going 3 or 4 years without checking would be your simple approach, I think.
Yeah, and I think I generally agree with that the offset account is a useful tool, and in many cases will be a better answer than actually making additional repayments. The one proviso I would make in that, though, is that if you're starting out and you don't have $10,000 or $20,000 sitting around, the offset will usually cost you more than it will save in tax.
Because the banks charge a fee for the facility.
So if you're paying $350 a year for your package loan to get your offset
annual
account,
fee,
you really need to be keeping $10,000, $15,000 in the account to earn back the $350 fee. But obviously, once you get above that amount, then it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. So, for example,
so for our starting out first home buyer, you'll usually be better off in the first year or two going for a no frills fixed rate.
Pay it down. The only if you wanted to do something in the next 2 to 3 years, that might be, and you wanted to keep that cash liquid, that's where you might have that offset, even if you was costing you $350.
Well, why don't you just put in a high interest saving account?
Well, it's
because that's just a tax arbitrage, and if it's costing you $350 a year or $299 or whatever the annual package fee is, you need $10,000 to $20,000 on deposit all year for that to be the tax difference. Yep. So why bother?
Yeah.
Okay, I would throw one more comment in there. What if somebody did the Glen James spending plan and they're going to get a mortgage and they go, look, we want to do better with our money, so we want to set up some offset accounts just so we can quarantine our money. We don't have 3 different online saver accounts with different banks. And the fact that they've got the offset facilities, quarantine their money, would allow them to actually save more anyway in their life than not having the offset account. So
I'm not sure what the difference between an offset account and a high interest saving account apart from the tax.
But I suppose I get what you're saying, Glenn, and I would.
Well, a high interest. I guess what I'm saying is a high interest online savings account generally doesn't have an account in BSB that you can pay money into and use as a cash hub type scenario. You can't really use them as a transaction account where you can.
But that's just drives your threshold. So if you're earning 0 interest on your transaction account, compared to earning, in effect, the mortgage rate after tax in an offset account, you still have to have a sizable balance to pay for a $300 annual fee. That's the only point I'm making.
Yeah.
That if you think you're getting an offset account because you're saving all this tax, well, actually, you need a decent balance to pay for the fee.
Yeah, I probably wouldn't be saying to get an offset account to save all this tax, quote unquote, more just to quarantine our money, have good behaviours and structure in place that will help our behaviour to save more money anyway.
Yeah, I'm just not.
Yeah.
I don't quite see the difference between, apart from the tax, the difference between a bank account and an offset account.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just the psyche of how people.
But I think, you're right that you do need to get into the habits, and I'm sure everyone who does the Glen James spending plan.
Oh, I love it when you talk to me like that.
is a guru at money.
Yeah. I won't touch on principal and interest now, other than to say I'm not touching on it. Like for me personally, I
never touch my principal.
No. Do you have principles? What?
I've got an exam that says I'm ethical.
Yeah, that's right. I personally have my principal place of residence and my investment property on principal and interest, only because the interest rate was cheaper and it's for savings. And if money's in my life not attributed to anything, it grows legs. That's basically my comment on that.
And in most cases, paying the premium, now that interest only comes at a higher interest rate than principal and interest, you do need to think very carefully about what I'm getting for this excess. And on your home, there's very little reason why you should go interest only, and you certainly shouldn't be paying more for it. There are a couple of obscure circumstances, but for the
there could be some short-term strategy and whatnot.
Start a new business, need cash flow, whatever.
But, or about to sell it, or about to rent it out.
Yeah.
But generally, the extra 0.3 to 0.5% you pay today for interest only, you really got to be getting something special to pay that.
Yeah. I think the question comes, and it's really a personalised answer around this, is principal and interest on all properties versus principal and interest on your owner-occ and interest only on the others when they are tax deductible.
Or interest only on your debt recycling split.
Yep.
Yeah, which is essentially what I'm saying. So, my preference would probably personally be towards the latter, where you're interest only and you're highly focused principal and interest, putting all funds towards that, what I call bad debt.
Yeah. And 5 years ago, this was a no-brainer that you would absolutely do that, because you didn't pay a premium for interest only. And at the right rate, you might actually structure that recycling account as a line of credit, subject to, depending on how much extra
and making sure you got your accounting in order.
Yeah. And the difference between principal and interest only is actually shortened the gap in the last 12 months as well.
It did blow out quite a bit.
Yeah. So just, again, keeping an eye on what that's doing is key.
I'll finish on the mortgage structures. For example, the house that I live in, there's an intention that I'll never sell the house, and it will be an investment property longer term when I outgrow it.
When you move into an aged care home?
When I move into an aged care home. Thanks, Vince. I've got an offset account.
I'll see you there.
I pay principal and interest onto the offset account, onto the mortgage, and I've got a savings account on the offset with the lion's share of my wealth just sitting there at the moment. So that's kind of...
Yeah. And generally, when it comes to your home, you need to pay the debt off by the time you retire.
Totally.
So if you're buying a new home at 40 when you have number 3 kid, you need, although the bank will give you a 30-year loan, you need to, have a plan that says this debt is gone by the time I retire. Now that
exit strategy, the banks call it.
Yeah. Well, at 40, you sort of sneak in without an exit plan.
Yeah, that's right.
Which is why I chose 40. But you still need to have, and that strategy might be, I'm going to pay it down to $100,000, and then I'm going to sell up and move to Blue Bay.
Lovely place. Now, if I can use that as a segue to future considerations, I guess when I was a financial planner and we were doing planning,
were you a financial planner?
Once a million years ago.
I think you were financial planner of the year, maybe.
Hey, yes, true. I don't like to blow my own.
Can you change your status, please?
No, So with more senior clients, if you will, so particularly
old blokes like me.
yes, particularly
Vince equivalents.
over 55s, for example, you really get
Young
to
blokes.
Is that you?
No,
Yeah.
they're young blokes, 55.
you really get to the sweet spot of options and flexibility. And I don't love financial modeling because assumptions really mean nothing. It's like, let's model 25 years at X amount percent. Well, it could change in 5 years. So
That's
who
right.
cares?
We used to have a saying in when I worked at investment banking that if you torture the numbers for long enough, they will eventually confess.
yes.
So you can make the numbers tell you whatever you want them to.
Yeah.
Exactly. But I guess what I'm saying with paying off the mortgage versus investing, if you were over 55 and you had a clear, hey, I will be stopping working in 8 years or 10 years or whatever, a lot of the time with the investing in super, when you model that out, keeping the mortgage on minimum payments, pumping super, and then once they retire from the workforce, withdraw from super tax-free and then clear the mortgage, and then a little bit of strategy that way.
Absolutely. When you're in that stage where you've got the kids off your hands, you got a line of sight on your retirement
Beach chair.
your beach chair, then maximizing super. So all of those diversification issues around tax treatment and flexibility of getting access become much less relevant because actually, once you turn 58, 60 ain't that far away.
Are you speaking from experience?
Speaking from personal experience, I've actually just hit my conditioner release.
He has, hasn't
Have
he?
you?
Yes, my
Well done.
what's the word?
Preservation.
Preservation age. Yes.
Yeah.
So what about the risk of topping up your super in preparation for retirement in 3 years, 4 years' time with an unforeseen GFC COVID hit where super can take quite a hit?
Well, that's more a question about what it's invested in
Yeah.
rather than which container it's in. So
That's right.
The super is just a
Tax structure.
tax haven.
Yeah.
And the question is, well, once I've got it in the tax haven and I've got all those benefits, now what am I going to invest in? And you might very well choose to put that bit of it in something
cash.
pretty stable.
Cash. Yeah.
Yeah,
which
because
is-
if you were like, all right, we're 3 years out from the line here, let's use our bring forward the what do we say before the 25K? It wasn't bring forward; it was
Carry
forward. So it was like we're going to pump super
Yep.
just for the tax optimization. We'll leave it in cash in the super account.
Yes.
And then once we get over that line, we withdraw that cash tax-free, then clear the mortgage
So you could earn 0% interest on it and still be ahead compared to
because of the
paying your
tax
home
saving.
loan.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, on the future considerations, Kathy McDonald said, because I put in the Facebook group that we're doing this episode, ooh, keen for this. This is something that Hubs and I have
Was that when you told her I was going to be on?
yeah, something like that. This
grey
is something
fox.
that Hubs and I have been discussing
Hubs.
lately, especially as this house isn't our forever home, quote unquote. I think smashing the mortgage on this one shouldn't be a priority because of this fact, but my husband reckons we should because even when we're ready to move on, we can always keep it as an investment property. So maybe an offset account could
Exactly, yes.
scratch both itches.
So if there's a thought that you might eventually rent it out, then obviously you want to have more of your debt on it. So in that case, an offset would be a very sensible way of
Yep.
storing this cash.
Pull it out.
And
when
I
you
just want to
change
talk
it.
about a little thing called tax evasion for a moment. And I'm looking at both of you.
Yeah.
Really?
So, for
Are you
example,
suggesting that I'm a tax evader?
not at all. For example, if an individual had 200 grand, okay, in their bank, or if they got an inheritance, put that money onto their principal place of residence, then withdrew that money from the mortgage, bought their new home with it, and then had the existing place as an investment property, they're basically shuffled money for tax reasons. But if they just had the 200 grand sitting on an offset account, it's actually never been committed to that home.
Yeah, there's a very famous case around this called the Duke of Westminster Principle, which says that everyone is entitled to arrange their affairs so as to minimise the incidence of tax.
Kerry Packer.
And Kerry Packer's
Famous words.
famous words about anyone who doesn't minimise their tax needs their head read, I think was his
That's
exact words. So you are entitled to arrange your affairs. What you're not able to do is to create a blatant, contrived and artificial set of
Yeah.
circumstances.
What was your intention?
Yeah. So there's got to be a reason why you're doing it. But clearly something like, paying off your loan and redrawing it is well within that.
Yeah, and I think circumstances in life change, don't they?
Mm.
So when you're taking something like that into account in the court of law, it's reasonable.
And then-
to suggest
But
that it
don't
can
write down
change.
that I'm doing this purely because of the tax.
Yes, yes.
No.
Now, also with future considerations, I'm just thinking like rent vesting. So let's have the example. We've got a young professional couple who might be renting in a capital city. They've used John's Envisage property services and got a new house and land package out of the city in a good space, and they're doing traditional rent vesting. Now, technically they are investing, not paying down the mortgage, but they do have a mortgage.
Yeah.
So what are we doing in the case of I'm a rent vestor and I have an investment property with a mortgage? Are we still doing P&I on that property, or does that come back to strategy and what are we doing?
Yeah, I think it definitely does come back to strategy. I think they've got to understand what's their next play going to be. Are they going to continue investing, or is it just going to be that investment property and live happily ever after? If it was that, then P&I every day of the week. But I think keeping your cash for further investing would be my thoughts on that.
Yeah. Or buying your home.
Or buying your own home. And I always say to people, if you haven't got your own home, there's a good chance that one day you will want it, even if you don't think you want it now. So you've got to be starting to put funds away or allocate funds somewhere for that when the chance may come. And usually it'll come sooner rather than later because family comes along. And
then the
pieces.
truth is that over any long enough period, the fixed cost option of buying your property will always be cheaper than renting. Over a sufficiently long period. And
Yeah,
that's
it
the
just gives you
that's the
flexibility.
catch.
And do you want to be 70 years old still renting?
And a lot of people go full
I
circle
don't.
with that. Like they have the large mortgage and their lifestyle's impacted, and they think, you know what, I actually want the flexibility of renting. I'm going to be doing some traveling, and they actually quite enjoy that because they can choose where they want to live and they can change that up. It just depends on the personality.
Exactly. And that's what comes back to circumstances.
Yeah.
And it's the long enough period that's the tricky bit. So if you're going to
Yeah.
think you're going to move cities, or you're going to meet someone when you travel and move overseas, or you're going to have kids and you need a bigger house, they're all reasons why you might not want to buy today.
No. And I think I always say property is a long, boring game.
It is.
So if you're doing too much transacting and you're too emotional about it, there's a fair chance a lot of your profits are going to be eaten up by costs.
Yeah.
Going back to, was it Kath? And Hubs?
Yeah, Kathy.
Yeah, so Kathy, like if Hubs wants to crash down on the mortgage, it's not the worst thing you can do because it's
it's
actually
still okay.
taking money out of your life so that you can't go and spend it somewhere else and paying down your debt. So if that's the worst thing that you do, then still okay.
That's
Yeah,
right.
and then if you want to get an investment property or another property later, we can still structure
That's right.
things
Yeah.
and cross
as a couple,
securitize and stuff like
I mean,
that.
you've really got to be on the same page when it comes to this.
Yeah.
Because you don't have to have one account, but you do need one money system. And if you're not both, so if she beats him up and wins the argument about
Metaphorically.
metaphorically speaking, that she wins the argument that says we should invest, and he's not on board, it will never end well, because if it goes badly, he'll go, I told you so. And if it goes well, it's just went well. So it's the number one answer to that is be on the same page. And then the second question is, well, what is that page?
Yeah.
I want to finish up with what I've written down, and if you guys want to add to this or
Can
just
you write?
Sorry?
Can you write?
Just
Typed.
typed.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, the writing's pretty bad.
One finger.
I thought I would write advantages of paying down a mortgage and then the advantages of investing and in keeping the mortgage as is. Okay. I think the advantages for myself, and if I'm chatting with people generally, it might be the emotional feeling that we're debt free and we don't have a bank in our life anymore, and we're happy with our lot in life, which is totally fine. If you just want to pump the mortgage, do your super contributions, and then once the mortgage is paid off, then just pump super and keep life simple. Awesome. There's no
Simple's
rules. So simple's good. Again, no bank in your life anymore. Money saved can go into further investments. I talk about life is simple, or perhaps you've been married or partnered up a bit younger. You want to pay down the debt and have a debt-free principal place of residence before you start a family, just as a lifestyle play to make sure one of the partners can stay home and not have to work. So it's all good, whatever you do. Any other quick advantages you could think of, or is it more of a lifestyle play?
It's a feeling of comfort play, which is not necessarily supported by the reality. And this is where the psychology plays again. It feels comfortable, but I guess
you could be doing your future self a disservice. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. And if you can't answer the question, when I've paid this off, I will do, I will feel, I will be. You can't finish each of those three sentences. It may very well not be the right answer, even though it's the safe answer. Yeah.
I thought the advantages of investing and keeping the mortgage as is, number one, there may be tax advantages with investing that accelerate your wealth creation. Simple as that. Even a salary sacrifice to super, you've effectively...
And the expected outcome is a higher level of assets.
Totally.
Over most periods, certainly over most periods in the last 40 years, you would have come out ahead on that strategy.
Totally. So, pay less tax, and the tax that you save is effectively being invested and growing. There's more than likely a higher return from your investments than the rates on the interest saved.
Yeah, almost certainly. Over almost all of the last 40 years, the average return has exceeded the average home loan debt, even in the late 80s.
Yeah, you've diversified your wealth into other asset classes.
Diversification is the only free lunch.
Totally. This is one that we haven't talked about, and I'll leave it out there for everyone to think about in podcast land. What up if you're still watching and listening? Possibly for the business owners, asset protection on your main house if you invest only via super or a trust. So there's a lien on the house by the bank.
Don't try this at home without advice.
Don't try this at home, kids. But it could be a cheap form of protecting the family home if you get your ass sued, because the bank have a lien on it. There's no meat in there for a creditor to come and sell the house from under you because there's no equity there.
Yeah, other than the fact that the bank is likely to be the biggest creditor.
Yes, but if you're in a high risk occupation and again, that's why I'm just
like
leaving
a podcast host.
Like a podcast host.
Yeah. So I think with the investing thing, leveraging is the big one for me. Is you can leverage you into assets that are far greater than what you could do with your own cash.
And the last one, an advantage of investing and keeping the mortgage as is, particularly for the business owners. Kerry, she's a new member of the Facebook group. Hi, Kerry. Thanks for joining us. What if the investment brings passive income quarterly, i.e. silent business partner? I just thought for myself, when I first started my business, part of the strategy was the house on interest only, because I want every living cent to go into the business, because I knew the business could do 30% a year and I could grow that up, build wealth. And
that is the biggest risk for small business people, is to believe, it may well be true that is the best or the highest returning place for your money, but higher returns don't always equal better returns, and putting all your eggs in the small business basket can be a very dangerous place to be.
And that's why when I was under 30, I knew it was risky business and I just went at it. But obviously all my mortgages are back to principal and interest. I've got an investment property, I've got business, I've got super, so it was very short-term injection.
Yeah, sure. At the beginning, that's a great strategy. Yeah. But obviously as time goes by, you need to be taking some money off the table to put in super.
Absolutely.
Because betting that your business is the thing that's going to fund your retirement when you want to retire is a big punt.
Unless your name's Jeff Bezos.
Yes.
Yeah. I want to first, before we finish with some comments from the Facebook group, I want to introduce a new segment to the podcast. We don't know what the segment's called yet, so we're going to ask the Facebook group. We're going to do this once a month, and a lot of people love Vince's sexy, soothing voice. And
You wish.
we want to do a segment where a financial advisor answers a question. So, Vince, this segment is brought to you by Lifesherpa. It's financial advice for
young people.
young people. And you can go to lifesherpa.com.au. Now, Vince, over to you for your first crack at this new segment. What's the question today?
Okay, well, Barrett writes that her HECS will be paid off at the end of the year and she can't decide if she should put the extra money on her mortgage or salary sacrifice into super. She notes that being female, she's going to have some time out of the workforce, like a lot of women, and that will leave her behind the 8 ball on super contributions. But on the other hand, she's concerned about having access to the cash. Now, Barrett doesn't say how old she is or whether she has a home loan. Oh, she says she has a mortgage, but we don't know whether she owns her home. So because we don't know all of the facts, we need to just look at the broad principles at play here. So she will have some spare cash with her HECS paid off. And the question is, well, what do I do? What does she do with that? And she's identified 2 options here. She can pay down her mortgage or salary sacrifice into super. She's left out maybe I should invest it somewhere else. And the mathematical answer is that salary sacrificing in super is going to yield a much bigger lifetime return. So if you take $1,000 of after-tax income and pay it down on your home loan with a 30-year home loan to go, that's going to generate about $1,600 in lifetime interest savings, giving you a total return of $2,600. Whereas if you put that into super, you've got $1,300 working for you on day one because of the way the tax system works. And based on an average historical super return of 8% or something, that would turn into $14,000 when she turns 60. Now
and she's not missing the money anyway because it's being allocated to HECS. That's right.
So that sounds like a no-brainer, but it comes with a couple of downsides. So the first is that you don't get it back till you turn 60, or potentially more, given how young she is.
Yep.
And so if the money is earmarked for retirement savings and she knows she's not going to need it between now and age 60, that's a great strategy. But, if she's looking potentially future to take time out of the workforce, that money might be better used to fund her living expenses when she's on maternity leave, or to fund the education for the kid. In which case, either paying down the home loan or investing outside super will give her a better answer. And this is the difference between higher returns and better returns.
Well, there you go.
Thank you, Vince.
Thank you, Vince. Thank you so much. We'll finish up with a couple of comments from the Facebook group. And remember, if you want to join the Facebook group, you can do that. And while we've still got you, if you do listen on Apple Podcasts, we'd love a little 5-star review. That would be delicious.
Are there any other sort?
There's a 1-star.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people like giving a 1-star, which is fine, whatever. Erin, it says just how it ended up for me. She saved her emergency fund. Then she saved over 20% for a deposit on a house. Then she split her savings 50% for property, including principal place of residence, 25% extra super, 25% shares. That way my investments are a little more diversified. And
looks like a beautiful balanced.
I just love that.
Balanced,
I wrote on the Facebook group.
Is she a Sagittarian?
I don't know, but didn't they just change she might have been last week and then NASA changed it. Did you see that, Vince?
I saw your post.
Yeah,
I hadn't realised.
Yeah, NASA found another star sign and they reset all the dates.
Hopefully that doesn't mean I'm a Gemini.
Yeah.
Wow.
Ryan said, Even Dave Ramsey says put 15% into retirement before paying extra to the home loan. But anything beyond 15% is like taking out a mortgage to invest. Do you guys agree?
Yeah, I'm with Dave.
Well, I mean, as long as you got a home loan, I just borrowed money to buy my coffee this morning. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and I think you do need to be careful about taking that position that you'll just feel terrible. It is true mathematically that every cent you spend is borrowed in that context.
As long as you've got a mortgage, yeah.
But Dave's advice, or Mr. Ramsey's advice, is American-centric in that sense.
Totally.
Because most Australians are already putting in 9.5%. And in fact, if you look at that as a percentage of your take-home pay, it's more like 15.
Totally.
So I would be nervous about cranking that up early in life. That I would really want to see home loan under control, some investments outside super, and then look at cranking up the super. And 15% is a big number to be earmarked purely for retirement savings.
And I'll finish with this. Thanks for coming on today, Vince. Thanks, John.
Thank you, Vince.
And
Thank you, John.
we will do another episode about investing inside or outside of super. But Catherine said on the Facebook group she was excited for this podcast, and she's put tick emergency fund, tick housing at 20 to 30% of income, tick don't let husband buy more AU Falcon utes or parts. And I would like to say to you, Catherine, that's horrendous advice. Your husband needs to buy more AU Falcon parts and utes. Thanks, guys. See you soon.
Glenn.
Thank you, Glenn.
Bye.
Thank you, John.